5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live, Lichtman Live. Dad, breaking news. Trump's megabill, his self-proclaimed BBB, has passed both the Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives.
It's one of the saddest days in U.S. history.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not being hyperbolic.
You're not.
I don't think there has been such a dismal piece of legislation, maybe since the Fugitive Slave Act on the run-up to the Civil War. You know, we've gone over all the awful things that this bill does, and we'll reprise that in a moment. But, Sam, this is a very special show, and I know you have a special announcement.
Yes, today is our 150th episode. Pretty exciting stuff. So even though, you know, the country's going to shit, at least we're carrying on strong. 150 episodes of Lichtman Live. That's a lot.
That is a lot, especially for me. It's a lot of energy and effort. And I really appreciate the support our audience has given us with donations and members and views. It's incredibly important.
Right.
Now,
everybody put 150 in the chat now.
Yes. Wouldn't that be great? We've gone over the horrors in this bill. At least a $3.3 trillion hole in the deficit.
No. Mike Johnson said it's not going to cause any issues with the deficit.
Yeah, because that's their, fabricated math. Then they don't count the blow to the deficit from the tax cuts because they said, these were tax cuts that had been enacted earlier. Of course, without this bill, they would have expired, and you wouldn't blow the $3.3 trillion hole in the deficit.
But no, Mike Johnson can't lie. He's a moral man. He is connected to God and Jesus Christ. He can't be lying because he's too moral of a Christian. When
anyone tells me, they're sanctified by God, what they're doing is God's work, I put my hand right in my pocket because I know I'm in very big trouble.
Why do you put your hand in your pocket?
Because I don't want them to steal whatever I have.
Oh, I see.
Which they're out to do. We've talked about this before. Mike Johnson has cherry-picked the most peripheral, the most unrepresentative elements of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Was Jesus talking about homosexuality, about same-sex marriage, about abortion? Sam? No, of course not. What he was talking about were all the things that Mike Johnson and the Republicans have ignored, exemplified in this bill. What he talks about overwhelmingly are the dangers of greed and wealth. And there could be no more greedy a bill than this. No more hard to imagine a bill that would create greater wealth disparities than this particular bill. He talks about caring for the poor and the marginalized and the sojourner among us. And guess what this bill does? It pumps up to further blow a hole in the deficit, well over $100 billion for this horrific deportation effort that is not deporting criminals. We've talked about this before. 72% of those deported or detained have no criminal record at all, no convictions. And the vast majority of the others have minor convictions like an illegal left turn or driving with a broken taillight, And another thing that Jesus has taught us, and it's also in the Judaic tradition, is fidelity to truth. And they're just fabricating things, making them up, presuming that, Americans are not fact checkers. They're only going to remember what Trump tells them. Remember what Trump said. Don't believe what you see and hear with your own ears. Only believe what we tell you.
We're getting a lot of love in the chat for our 150th episode, so thank you all very much. My mom, your wife, says, one episode at a time. You've built not just a channel, but a legacy. Here's to the passion, persistence, and purpose behind every frame. Congrats on your 150th episode. That's a very nice message.
That means a lot, and your mom is so eloquent, such an extraordinary writer. I'm always in awe of her,
and
aside from being a world-class athlete.
One thing, you know, you're talking about ICE and deportation and immigration. This bill is going to give ICE like $127 billion extra dollars, which is like bigger than the military budget of India or the UK. Basically all countries on earth except for like Russia, China, USA, basically. I mean, this is going to be like this monster federal police force.
Accountable to whom? To the Constitution?
No,
to the law.
Trump. And you know they're so worried about spending and, you know, fraud and abuse in Medicaid. They can't pay for healthcare, but they got $127 billion to give to ICE,
plus some tens of billions for this useless border wall, you know, that Trump has been promoting for God knows how long, perhaps a decade.
And I want to say this, I've said this before, but this is something that I just feel like nobody in the media says. This entire immigration agenda by Trump and the right wing is built on a house of lies. Immigrants aren't taking your health care away. They're not causing the affordability crisis. They're not stealing your jobs. All of these things are backed up with real studies, real statistics. So not only are they being immoral in their immigration enforcement, it's also built on a house of lies. Giving ICE all this money is not going to make the average American's life any better. It's not going to fix the affordability crisis. It's not going to make, as you pointed out, they commit crimes lower than native-born Americans.
Way lower.
I mean, I don't know why enough people don't say that. It's all built on a house of lies.
That's why we've had 150 episodes, because we tell it like it is. You know, we don't sugarcoat things. And, you know, you've heard me criticize the mainstream media, and I've been pretty unhappy with what I've seen in the explanation of why this bill has passed. But before I get to that, don't take our word for it why this bill is so bad, why it's going to greatly expand income inequality. You know, those in the lowest quintile, lowest fifth, they're going to lose money because of what it's doing to health care and food stamps. Those in the middle, they're going to get a pittance, chump change. Who's going to get the big benefits of this, Sam?
Rich people.
Rich people. We already have an inequality of income and wealth approximately equal to that way back in 1929 on the eve of the Great Depression. And this is only going to make it worse. And one of the things that destroys democracy is, of course, inequality in income and wealth, when just a few have such enormous, exorbitant power that they can manipulate government and society in their own interests, and the hell with everyone else. And this just makes that so much worse. And by the way, the supposed benefits to the people in the middle, you know, I think they've estimated something like $1,200 a year. That's all going to be destroyed. You know why, Sam?
Tell me.
I'm going to tell you. Because when you blow a hole in the deficit, what happens to interest rates?
Tell me.
They go up. And guess what that means? Your mortgage is going to become more expensive. It's going to become more expensive to rent, more expensive to buy a house. If you want a loan, that's going to become more expensive. Your credit card interest is going to become more expensive. That is likely to eat up all, or at least the great majority of the supposed benefits to the middle. They're going to be gone. So the only benefits in real terms, when you consider the full impact of this bill, is going to the very wealthy.
And the other thing about Medicaid that I think I heard, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard people say, well, I've got private insurance, you know, Medicaid, these Medicare cuts won't affect me, but a lot of hospitals rely on the revenue from Medicaid to stay operating and open. So, yeah, you might not be on Medicaid, but it's going to shift the entire healthcare system. And obviously, a lot of people have talked about the rural hospitals that will close down, et cetera, et cetera. But I imagine it'll have an effect on the entire healthcare system,
Absolutely.
not just in rural hospitals, but hospitals in regular towns and even cities, I imagine.
This bill has reverberating effects, negative, on the entire society. We talked about how people in the middle are going to have to pay a lot more for a lot of things. I haven't even mentioned education. The cost of education is going to go up because of the tax, that they're putting on colleges and universities, and because they're making it so much more difficult to repay loans. Even if you're defrauded, this bill makes it more difficult for you to deal with loans that you got on the basis of fraud. They're always shouting, right, about waste and fraud, but in fact, they're doing nothing about it. Moreover, the states that, are penalized the least from the Medicaid cuts, and this was just pointed out, I didn't even realize this till I read an article about it today, are the case states with the biggest Medicaid errors, the biggest alleged waste and fraud. So they're doing just the opposite of what they claim they are doing. But Sam, you're right. This bill has a reverberating effect on the entire society.
Right. Can I list some things? I just did some research.
Yes.
So even if you're not on Medicaid, you're likely to feel the effects in the forms of higher premiums and taxes, longer wait times, fewer care options, overloaded hospitals, and a sicker, more unequal society. Wow. Man,
and that's just the medical. We talked about that before. If people aren't on Medicaid, what they're going to do is postpone preventive care, right, Sam?
Right.
Because they're not going to pay for it. That means they're going to be more susceptible to illness, to disease. And where are they going to go to get treated if they don't have insurance?
Just to the emergency room.
The most expensive, least efficient form of care, which further burdens the hospitals, further creates lines for your medical care. So your education is going to get more expensive. Your medical care is going to decline and get more expensive. Your mortgage, your rates, your credit card, your car loans, everything else is going to get more expensive. Add to that the fact that the $3.3 trillion hole in the deficit is a way underestimation, because when you add structurally to the deficit, what happens? You are expanding debt servicing. In other words, money that could go to health care or education, in fact, is going to go to servicing the debt through Treasury bills. And guess who benefits from Treasury bills? Is it, the less affluent Americans? Of course not. It's those at the top of the income and wealth pyramid. And let's not forget another ripple effect that this bill has. Climate change. They've gutted efforts to combat catastrophic climate change, which is not a theory, although it's supported by 98% or more of scientists who publish in peer-reviewed journals. It's here. It's with us. And by the way, Sam, the aid to deal with climate change, which states were getting most of it? Do you know?
Florida, Louisiana.
Exactly, the red states.
Texas.
Overwhelmingly, because they're the ones who tend to bear the biggest brunt of climate change. So they're hurting their own constituents. So consider the reverberating effects on almost everything. Our well-being and our lives from climate change, our education, our loans, our health care. This bill reverberates through all of these critical elements of our society, as well as creating massive additional inequalities of income, which is a clear and present danger to democracy and to the economy. But don't take my word for it, Sam. Let's look at what some Republicans have said until, of course, as I predicted on our last show, they caved in.
Let me guess, they're going to be hypocritical.
Imagine that.
What? No, come on.
You know, I explain why this is true in my book, Conservative at the Core, which is right behind us. So here's the ultra-conservative, Sam, House Freedom Caucus, right? The most conservative members who should be right in line with Trump. Here's what they said. This is not fiscal responsibility. It's not what we agreed to. Republicans much do better. Representative Chip Roy, one of the most conservative members of Congress from Texas, said this bill increases deficits and violates the terms of the budget deal. Representative Keith Self, another conservative, also from Texas, said this bill, couldn't have said it better, is, quote, morally and fiscally bankrupt. Our own Andy Harris, our very conservative member from Maryland, said they changed the entire package in the Senate, both inside and outside the bill, significantly. Can you hold this for a sec? Here's another conservative, David Valadeo of California, who says that he could not embrace the, quote, harmful cuts to Medicaid, unquote. Josh Hawley, one of the most conservative members of the Senate, said, quote, we cannot be a working class party if you are taking away health care for working class people. And guess what all these representatives and senators did, Sam, when push came to shove?
They voted for it. And you've been
Right.
saying that for a while. And there was some speculation, you know, maybe because it changed in the Senate, a lot of the more fiscally conservative folks wouldn't vote for it and it wouldn't pass. But you've been saying the whole time, it's going to pass, and it passed.
I've said all along, you know, they may huff and they may puff and they may, you know, present these criticisms, but when push comes to shove, they all cave. Look, it's not a surprise. If you could vote for the quack, the documented quack, RFK Jr. to head our health care, if you can vote for the clearly incompetent and dangerous Pete Hegseth to run our military, you can vote for anything.
And I know we've been watching a little bit of the news together lately, and they keep saying, oh, the Republicans are scared of Trump, et cetera, et cetera. And you've been getting upset. You've been saying, no, this is what conservatism in America looks like. Even if Trump wasn't the president, they would still support a bill like this.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm sure they are scared of Trump. Your mom reminds me that that's true, and absolutely that's true. But as I point out in my book, Conservative at the Core, this represents what conservatives have stood for 100 and more years. It goes all the way back to the big tax cuts and business favors and deregulation of the Harding and Coolidge administration way back in the 1920s. They have always, and you know, as their core value, promoting big business, not free enterprise, but private enterprise. And they have always taken that out on the most vulnerable. How many Republicans voted for the Affordable Care Act, Sam?
None.
That has been of immense value in vastly reducing the number of uninsured Americans, which is now going to climb again as a result of this bill.
And your whole point, I believe, is that, you know, people are making excuses for these Republicans. Like, they, you know, if it wasn't for Trump, they would never vote for something like this. It's like, no, this has been their agenda for 100 years.
This is what they believe in. This is what they've been doing. And this bill is their ultimate dream, the culmination of 100 years of American conservatism. Don't let these senators and representatives off the hook and say, oh, they're only doing it, you know, because they're scared of Trump. Yes, they're scared of Trump, but that's not the point. The big point is they would do this anyway, independent of Trump, because this is what conservatism has represented for 100 years. And as I demonstrate in my book, Trump is not a maverick who's hijacked conservatism. He is the culmination, the representative of 100 years of conservatism. It's not by accident that a greater percentage of self-identified conservatives voted for Donald Trump than guess who they voted for? Who's the iconic conservative of all time for Republicans?
Reagan.
Reagan. And he outdid Reagan in support from conservatives. This is no surprise. It's not because they're afraid, although yes, I'm sure they are. It's because this is what they're all about. This is what they believe in. And Democrats have to hammer that home, that if Trump disappeared tomorrow, the Republican Party would not fundamentally change. That's why in 2026, you've got to go after every possible Republican seat that you can, because the problem runs deep and broad into the Republican Party. And it's way too superficial to say, oh, this is only because of Donald Trump. You know, I saw something I think it was in, can you hold this a minute?
Yes, sir.
I think it was in Rolling Stone. That just amazed me, but kind of epitomizes it all. Conservative Republican Derek Van Orden, according to Rolling Stone, shared a post from an X account named Logical Lumina, whatever that is, that said, quote, 17 million people just lost health care. 18 million kids just lost school meals. 3 million Americans just lost food service. And 3.5 trillion was added to the deficit. All for a tax cut for Trump's billionaire donors. And in response, Van Orden wrote, yes, in big capital letters, exclamation point. Then, of course, deleted the post when he got a backlash, and then had this incredible excuse. There was an excuse. Oh, I didn't mean this to be a response to the thing I posted. It was supposed to be a response to a different text, and all of this is BS anyway.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Maybe this is more of a psychological question than a political question, but why do... You just bit that paper.
It doesn't taste real good.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. Why do Republicans have this agenda? Like, do they really, truly believe in trickle-down economics? Are they just evil? I mean, I don't buy that. As a person, I think that's too simple of an explanation, that they're just evil, and I think that's too simple.
I think they do believe in trickle-down economics. But let's not forget, you know, the first rule of politics: reward your friends and punish your enemies. And, you know, for 100 years, Democrats have been much more effective in rallying the grassroots in numbers. And Republicans have offset that by big donations from the wealthy.
Right.
So this is incredibly beneficial to them. Plus, that's their buddies.
Right. I think
that's their friends.
I think big money is
But big money is at the root of it.
Interesting.
Look, you know, I think Elon Musk was right. And, you know, I said it months before he did. You know, without his intervention and his misinformation, Trump would not have won this election. That's how important, you know, big money is to the Republican Party. You know, right at the beginning of his campaign, according to press reports, Donald Trump went to the big oil companies and said, I'll let you do whatever you want. Just donate as much as you can to my campaign. And indeed, he's pretty much given the big oil companies and other big businesses a blank check at the expense of the vast majority of Americans. So the onus is now on the Democrats, right, Sam?
Yes.
I mean, they have a tremendous opportunity here. Remember, we showed polls showing that this bill is underwater by anywhere from 20 to 29 percentage points. Never has been such a major piece of legislation so thoroughly opposed by a vast majority of the American people. This is a real opening, a real opportunity for Democrats. But you can't just blame it on Trump. You've got to probe the deeper reasons. You've got to explain why you need to vote out all of these senators
that's a good
and
point.
representatives. Even though Trump is still around, that's what's going to make a real difference. And they've got to be bold. They've got to take it to the people with a simple, compelling message. As one of the great American heroes, the civil rights lawyer, the late, great Jerry Hebert said, get it down to where the goats can get it. And your mom has also developed an incredible message strategy, which she intends to disseminate to all the Democrats in the House and the Senate. Get your act together and don't be afraid. Republicans are going to lie. They already have grossly. No hole in the deficit from this bill, right? And don't be afraid. Republicans are going to criticize you no matter what you do.
And I think you make a good point about the fact that, like, Dems don't just sit there and point the finger at Trump and go, Trump's bad, Trump's bad. I mean, we've tried this for 10 years now. Doesn't work. Like you said, hit every policy decision that they're doing.
Correct.
Talk about how it's affecting everyday Americans.
And what your alternative is.
Right. Vote out the senators. Vote out the members of the House. I mean,
right.
Trump is certainly the leader, and that's important too, but you have to go broader than that.
And he can't run again. I mean, he may think he can, but he's not running again. So, he's not just your target. You have to go much more broadly and explain how all of these Republicans are screwing over the American people and what your alternative is.
And I think that's something that the left wing of the Democrat Party is doing well. People like Bernie, AOC, Mamdani, they don't spend all their time talking about Trump every 4 seconds. They talk about real issues that people care about, and it seems to work.
Yeah.
We keep getting this MSNBC come up when we're watching the news at first, and it's just like, all they're doing is talking about this specific show. I'm not going to name names, but like all they do for an hour straight is just talk about Trump. And it's like, eventually we have to move past that. It's not working,
It's not working, and it can't work. And, I've been accused of talking too much about Trump. And
you do that.
Truth to, but we didn't talk about Trump today, did we? We talked about the senators and representatives who believe in this. And despite, their fulsome protests, all voted for it as we predicted they would do. So the problem runs deep within American conservatism and is not just Trump. Read my book. It's all there. This is consistent with 100 years of American conservatism.
Well, it's not out yet. Pre-order it.
Pre-order it. It's out September 1. You can pre-order it on Amazon or on the University of Notre Dame Press. And Sam, we just got an incredible review, did we not?
Do you want me to bring it up?
Yes, please. In the very, very important Library Journal. They do reviews in advance of publication, one of the few outlets that does that.
I'm trying to find it. Okay, there it is.
All right.
Hold on.
While you're... Yeah.
I got it.
All right.
Hold on.
And, the important thing, I don't expect people to read it. Go to the bottom line there, his recommendation.
Hold on. All right. This one?
Verdict.
Oh, verdict. Highly recommended for readers interested in American politics and political affairs. I mean,
no, American history and political affairs.
Right. I mean, that's not... people should go and check out the full review.
Yeah, of course, but I don't expect them to do it right now on the screen. It's real easy to find. Just Google Conservative at the Core Reviews, and this will come right up. That's as good as it gets. Right. Highly recommended both for history and for political affairs, which is exactly what I was hoping this review
How about
would
this
do.
part? Lichtman is an able guide to politics. He's well known for his election forecasting system. Verdict. Yeah, okay, we read all that.
Yeah, they say very nice things about me, and they get the book right. It's very important. Now, there are other things going on that are incredibly important that I can't just let go, Sam.
Okay.
Shutting down essentially the vast majority of USAID, our aid program. Did you ever hear of the Lancet Medical Journal?
No.
It's one of the leading medical journals in the world. in the world. It's incredibly reliable. They just issued a report on the estimated deaths over the next 5 years from the USAID cuts that the Trump administration is engaged in. And you know how many deaths they were estimating? 14 million. Not 14,000, not 1,400. 14 million deaths over the next 5 years as a result of the closure of food kitchens and health clinics, a halt in the shipments of medication, of water purification tablets, of nutrition packets for starving children. Kids are going to starve. Kids are going to get sick. Kids are going to die for no good reason. No explanation. And as we said, 1% of our budget goes to foreign aid. And most of that isn't USAID anyway. So you don't save anything. And you're killing people in the most dire and poverty-stricken areas. And you're destroying one of the pillars of American power, authority, and credibility around the world, our soft power, our standing. And as we've said many times, we pull out. Who pulls in? China and Russia. Already, a poll was just recently taken which shows while under Biden we were way ahead of China in the standing around the world, we've now fallen behind China. Can you imagine? America has less standing in the world than China, this horrible dictatorship. Who would ever have thought that would come to pass? Next point. What did I predict would happen with Ukraine, Sam? You heard it right in the show.
I believe you predicted that they're going to start fading their support and get distracted by things happening in the Middle East, right?
Exactly. And who benefits from that?
Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin. And indeed, they just announced, retroactively, I think, to March, a pause in military aid to Ukraine, including the PAC-3 missiles for Patriot air defense systems, at the very time that the Russians are greatly stepping up their air attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine, killing and wounding people. Just atrocious. But that's not all. They've also stopped precision artillery rounds, Hellfire, and other missiles that Ukraine launches from its F-16 fighters and drones. According to independent analysis, this is crippling, or at least has the potential to cripple Ukraine's defense against the Russians. One of the reports notes, this comes as Russian troops are rapidly advancing in Ukraine while the number of air attacks against cities far from the front lines soars. Again, people are going to die because of this ill-advised, ill-fated decision on the part of the Trump administration. And guess who's cheered this, Sam? Welcomed it? The Russians. You know, saying, oh, this is wonderful. This is something that will hasten the end of this war, meaning this will hasten our ability to end the war by conquering Ukraine. But I want to end before we get to questions and housekeeping on a positive note. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. ruled yesterday that Trump cannot deny entry to people crossing the border to apply for asylum, that the asylum provision is law. It's been part of U.S. law since 1980 that you're allowed to seek asylum in the U.S. if you can show a credible fear of persecution in your home country. You cannot, by executive fiat, repeal a law of Congress. Quote, the president cannot adopt an alternative immigration system which supplants the statutes that Congress has enacted. Of course, all of these things are going to go to the Supreme Court, and who knows what's going to happen. You know, Supreme Court has this so-called rocket docket where they don't deliberate much, they don't give their reasons, and Trump's requests have gone right to the Supreme Court with almost no delay. But think back when Special Counsel Jack Smith on a critical issue of immunity from prosecution for the president, with serious indictments already pending. The court delays for months upon months before holding a hearing and issuing a ruling.
Okay. That is some good news.
It's always good to have good news, at least temporarily.
All right, we're going to get to some housekeeping stuff. We've got almost 1,800 people watching, Dad.
Wow.
We've only got 628 likes, guys. Come on, let's get those likes up. Subscribe. If you're not subscribed, click that notification bell so you know we're live. 2 quick announcements. One, we have an ongoing competition to win a signed copy of your book. But I just want to make an announcement that competition will be closed July 8th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure you enter our contest. It's going to be fun, and you could win a signed copy of his book. The other thing, our merch store is now live, Dad.
Wow.
There's some really cool options here. Your famous quote, Republicans have no principles, Democrats have no spine. And the back actually has the Dem and the spine. And if you just want to be a Lichtman Live lover, there's some cool hats.
Hey, you got my quiz show appearance from 44 years ago.
Absolutely.
When I had a mustache that your mom hates.
Yikes. Now you guys know why he doesn't have a mustache anymore.
I don't have a mustache anymore.
All right, let's get to our questions. Remember,
and don't forget, this is our 150th show. If you want another 150, please join as a member. Please donate. There's a lot of work that goes into this.
how would you advise the Dems to talk about the BBB and its effect going into 26? I mean, we talked about that a little bit.
We had a long discussion about that, but let me reiterate, just because it's so important. Can't just go after Trump. You've got to show that this horror is endemic within the Republican Party, and it's critical to change the composition of the Senate and the House, as well as state legislative and gubernatorial elections. This just isn't Donald Trump. This is what the party is all about.
This is a $5 donation from Teacher Gem. Thank you so much. They say, what would you say to regular people who feel powerless but still care deeply about this country? That's a good question.
That's a really good question. And it's easy to feel powerless. It's easy to fall into despair. But as someone who studied the long history of this country, we have survived terrible crises before. The burning of Washington during the War of 1812, the horrible, bloody Civil War, which projected onto today's population would be many, many millions of deaths. The Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War. Ordinary people still have power. You can't despair. Vote with your feet. Join demonstrations. Rally people to vote. Of course, vote yourself. Contribute to organizations that are challenging what's going on in Trump's and the Republicans' Washington. Don't despair. We don't. 150 shows and we're still going.
What are the odds that the BBB fails a month after being put into law? Do you understand? I don't really get that.
Yeah, it's going to take much, much longer than that, particularly because some of the worst provisions like the Medicaid cuts are put off until, of course, after the 2026 midterms, hoping that people will just forget about them, and vote on something else. So I think we're looking at long-term, not short-term effects.
So how would that look? Like courts blocking certain provisions of it or something? Or
Well, what it's going to look like is a public backlash. That's the most important thing, and an effect on the economy. But again, these things take a while to percolate.
Right. With the BBB now passed, Republicans are facing an unprecedented political backlash. It looks like the BBB has sealed their fate early. What's your take on how this will reshape the midterm map?
Thanks for the $20. You're absolutely right. But as we pointed out, it's not going to solve itself. There is an opportunity, but that opportunity must be seized and utilized by those who oppose this bill. Democrats and independents alike need to unite in explaining the opposition to this bill and putting forth real alternatives. And there are plenty of alternatives. You know, one of the most attractive alternatives, something I'm no big fan of his, but I agree with him on this in AOC, taxing wealth. Why don't billionaires pay taxes? Warren Buffett, not Donald Trump. Warren Buffett has said, I don't know how many tens of billion dollars he's worth, many. He said he pays fewer taxes than his secretary. Do you know why, Sam?
Because they don't tax wealth.
They don't tax wealth. There are trillions upon trillions of dollars in untaxed wealth that could shore up Medicaid, shore up Social Security, shore up Medicaid, deal with the deficit. All of that is going absolutely untapped. Then there's trillions of dollars in these offshore havens, to evade taxes. And instead of going after that, we haven't talked about this much, they're gutting the ability of the IRS to go after these billionaires who are stashing their money abroad. And rather than discouraging immigration, we should be encouraging immigration because, I think you pointed this out, Sam, without immigration, our population is declining. We're becoming a population of old people like me, a very top-heavy population. And what's fueling our workforce, fueling our population, fueling our small business is immigration.
$5 donation from Saltigar 1000. They say, won't the Medicaid cuts simply force doctors to accept more reasonable salaries? If they move to other countries, wouldn't they be paid even less?
It's not the doctors that are an issue. It's the hospitals. It's the hospitals, as even Josh Hawley admitted, even though he voted for the bill, who depend upon these Medicaid payments and aid from the states that's going to be slashed. To say the problem is doctors' salaries are too high is absurd. And in fact, doctors' salaries relevant to the economy have been declining, not increasing.
Yeah, I don't think most of the chunk of your medical bill is going to pay the salary of doctors.
No, only just like it's the same thing with the federal government. The bulk of the federal expenditures are not going to pay workers. That's about 6.6% of the entire federal budget.
Philip H., our good friend, says, how do we get out of the perpetual cycle of Republicans stripping rights and passing harmful legislation, only for Dems to spend their time fixing it?
Well, at least we can hope they'll fix it. When Republicans win elections, they're going to do what they've always done for 100 years, as I point out in my book. There's been a lot of buyer's remorse among Trump voters, and I have no sympathy for that. You know why, Sam?
I don't either.
Yeah, because Trump is right out in front. Trump doesn't hide things. He's right out there telling you what he is going to do. Nobody should have been fooled. Nobody should be surprised by what Trump is doing because he's been touting these things for years.
I mean, I think, the line of progress in America has luckily slowly gone up. If you look at the details of the graph, it probably goes up, down, up, down, up, down.
Right, nothing goes straight up or straight down.
The trajectory is up.
Absolutely.
But I do feel like in the last, since the 80s, maybe the late 70s, it does feel like economically inequality is just growing and progress is not really coming on a lot of those issues.
Let me give you some concrete evidence for that. We presented this statistic before. Since 1989, 13 trillion, not billion, $13 trillion in wealth have been transferred not from 50% of us, but from 99% of us, almost everyone, to the top 1%. That's why this bill is so pernicious. because instead of fighting that kind of dangerous inequality, they're adding to it. And not just with the tax cuts, as we said. This bill reverberates through our entire society and our entire economy. Who's going to get hurt most by climate change? The top 1%?
No.
No. They can insulate themselves with it. It's the rest of us who are going to feel the brunt of climate change, as well as all of these other negative things, the cost of mortgages and loans and education. And, you know, that's not going to cut deeply into the benefits from the very rich, but it's going to wipe out, and maybe more, the benefits to the middle and really hurt those in the lower brackets.
Our good friend Patrick Murray says, Anthony Scaramucci said Trump might not last until the midterms due to his antics. You yourself has said in the past that Trump will not finish his term. What do you mean by that?
Well, I wasn't quite that, emphatic. I said there's a good chance Trump might not finish his term, not because of the 25th Amendment, which can be invoked when presidents are incapable of carrying out their duties, not because of impeachment, but just because of health. I'm not sure his health will hold up over the next 3.5 or so years. Take that with a big grain of salt. I'm not a doctor, but a lot of doctors, have voiced similar concerns. A lot of doctors have also pointed out clear evidence of Donald Trump's cognitive decline. Doctors, experts in the field, psychiatrists, neurologists. The media for weeks was fixated. It was the biggest story in the world about Biden's cognitive decline. Well, it manifests differently for Trump, but it's just as evident, and the media scarcely touches it.
Can I be honest with you? I don't buy this whole thing that he's not going to make it through this term. He's the Teflon Don. Nothing brings him health.
That's the only thing I'm talking about.
He's been overweight for 30 years and he's still going. I mean,
you could be right.
I don't know. I don't buy it.
It's just a guess. As I said, I'm not a doctor. It's not a flat-out prediction. But I think it's at least 50-50.
$10 donation, actually $20 total from Jim Blowers. Thank you so much. They say, Froma Herup wrote an editorial saying Mamdani won't be mayor of New York City because he would tax richer and whiter neighborhoods, i.e. by race. And for his saying, globalize intifada. Do you agree?
No, he is going to be mayor of New York City because he's the Democratic nominee, and it's overwhelming. He's not taxing by race. That's another, right-wing fabrication. Yes, he wants to attack the wealthy, who do happen to be overwhelmingly white. Guess what? They control the vast majority of wealth in this country. The gap in wealth, say, between whites and blacks is 10-1. And yet, to listen to Trump and the Republicans, you would think white people are the ones being discriminated and, being put in unfortunate positions. He's not taxing by race. He's taxing the wealthy, which is a pretty popular provision in New York City and other progressive areas. And I don't know, something he said 8 years ago, that's not going to sink him. And I don't know the full context of it.
$5 donation from Secular Monk. They say, can ICE go onto Native American reservations? Tribes govern themselves. I'm now hearing that ICE is going on reservations. Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
I'm actually currently working on a documentary about ICE and Native Americans, which should be coming out soon, so stay tuned for that.
Who's producing it?
Deutsche Welle, International Broadcasting, or DW, as most people know it by. My understanding is that they are waiting essentially just outside of reservations, and if folks come off the reservation, which they often do to visit family or to work a lot of the times, they often get nabbed by ICE and get questioned and harassed, and many reservation folks don't have the same documentation that us folks who don't live on reservations have. So it's a real issue. I haven't heard any reports of them going on to the reservation, but they're certainly making it harder for Native American folks.
Hey, and now they're going to have another $160 billion to play with.
Yeah, it's not good.
So all bets are off in terms of what they've done to this point. They have exponentially greater power once this bill goes into effect.
Do you have any more comments on that? Or
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, again, I put nothing past them. I think they just arrested and deported a boxer.
Yeah.
Cesar Chavez Jr. or something.
Yeah.
I mean, they go after nursing mothers, kids, anyone.
I mean, he fought, Cesar Chavez Jr. fought on Saturday night. He had a fight in the United States on Saturday night.
And guess what?
And now he's deported already.
That creates revenue, right? And taxes.
Yeah.
And oh my God, it's just horrific. And they're wearing masks. Whoever thought masked thugs would be pulling people off the street in America?
Yeah, you'd think if their job was as morally put together as Republicans want to make you think, they wouldn't have to wear masks.
No, this should all be done right out in the open. And you hear this, what's her name? Katherine Levit saying, we're the most transparent administration in history. Right. Again, it's George Orwell, right? Famine is plenty, war is peace, hate is love. Total lack of transparency is the most transparent administration in history. Have you ever seen any administration having masked thugs grabbing people off the street? Never.
No. What are your tips on how to celebrate July 4th, 2025?
Read history. Go through, how we have survived challenges in the past and what our democracy, our democratic republic is really and truly based on. Of course, I would say, look at my books. But
you're self-promoting now.
I've actually, suggested other historians you should look at, like John Meacham or Ibram X. Kendi. Jill Lepore is another one who, Orville Vernon Burton, Manisha Sinha. These are great historians who you should consult.
We have over 1,800 people watching. We're at 916 likes.
All right,
guys.
we're getting close to 1,000.
We need to get to that 1,000 mark.
We'll get there.
$20.
How much time do we have?
7 minutes.
Oh, plenty of time.
Plenty of time. And the good news is the Lichtman Live post show is coming up on my channel right after this.
That's
so
awesome.
Stay tuned for that. This is a $20 donation from Krasimir Boyanov. They say, Professor, I think that people are losing faith in both parties. No matter what people want, they are always on the losing side. How would you suggest fixing this and people's lack of trust in their rulers?
It's certainly understandable.
Yeah, I think government trust is at an all-time low,
it's
right?
Like at 20%, yeah. In the 60s, everyone demeans the 60s. It was 75% during the Kennedy administration. Then Lyndon Johnson maintained it and then squandered it with his folly with the war in Vietnam. And not surprising given my analysis of our politics. Republicans have no principles. Democrats have no spine. Republicans are not going to suddenly find principles beyond what we've talked about. But Democrats can grow a spine. There are models for that. I wrote a piece on this, decades ago with Jesse Jackson, saying, if Democrats want to succeed, they have to be bold. They can't be spineless. 30, 40 years later, that article is as fresh and as relevant as ever.
R.V. Davis says, is that fence concentration camp in Florida real? I'm not...
He's talking about the Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah.
It's horrific. It's an environmental disaster. It's cruel and unusual punishment. They don't care about that. By the way, Albrego Garcia, the guy they put in that hellhole in El Salvador illegally, claims, we'll see what happens when they get to court, that he was tortured in that prison, and that's why they moved him when he became so prominent into another prison.
Limited Light says, even Bartiromo.
That's
Maria Bartiromo.
Yeah, the Fox News
reported
business report.
33,000 jobs lost in June yesterday, yet Scripps today reports 140,000 added. What's going on? We were talking about this earlier.
Yeah,
I was like,
it's
yesterday
perplexing.
I was looking at the news. They were reporting a 33K job loss, and today they're reporting 140K gain.
Plus, you said 70,000 gained in government employment.
Yeah, we just saw the biggest cut of federal employees in United States history, and somehow this 140K report said that there was like a 70K increase in government employees. Now, granted, that can include state
but
local
still,
level.
that just doesn't make any sense, and I don't have an explanation. I don't want to. I avoid conspiracy theories, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics has always been pristine. But we've seen under Trump that you can't trust what comes out of government agencies. HHS under RFK Jr., Health and Human Services, came out with this big report, including sources that didn't exist, and they called it a formatting error. Formatting has to do with how you place your headings, nothing to do with fabricated sources. Do you think, Sam, for 1 minute, one of my students would get away with citing non-existing sources by calling it a formatting error?
No.
I would have given a freshman an F for that, much less a report coming out of one of our most critical government agencies. I also saw a report which said that, in fact, the scientists at FDA had recommended across the board COVID vaccines, but that was countermanded by the political appointee at the top. So I am skeptical of any, sadly, because, Bureau of Labor Statistics has always been the gold standard. But I'm sure some economists, and we're not, will try to parse this and explain it.
How do you know I'm not an economist?
Because I've known you for 33 years.
Oh. You just gave away my age.
No, I could have known you since you were 8.
So then I'm 41. All right. 3 more minutes left.
All right, well, you take a couple more questions.
Professor, is there a history of U.S. presidents overturning elections they didn't like? Can the president overturn congressional elections they don't like?
Presidents have no role whatsoever in the administration or investigation of elections. And I am unaware of any president who's actually overturned an election. I'd have to think about that, but that's would be a serious crime in my view. But that certainly wouldn't deter Donald Trump, and I am very worried. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am very worried about what they're going to do to the 2026 midterms. According to I think it was the New York Times report, that the Department of Justice is considering criminal investigations of election officials. Can you imagine that? Going after our election officials? A first step if they had an intent to rig the election.
All right. 2 more questions?
All right.
Or one more?
Not one of these long ones, though.
All right. One more then?
One more.
One more. This is from Daniel Ray. $20 donation. Thank you. They say, recently I read that Miami just postponed the mayoral elections and commission races. What do you think the chances are that something like this becomes normalized and could send a ripple effect in our election?
Look, I put nothing past this administration when it comes to trying to rig elections in their favor. We already saw in Texas a long delay in what should have been a quick special election for an open congressional seat. So there does already seem to be some small movement in this direction. But we need to be totally vigilant with respect to the integrity of our elections. And that's why I say support organizations that are upholding the integrity of our elections. And if you're a lawyer, volunteer your time for one of these organizations, because there are going to be an incredible number of lawsuits and litigation surrounding the 2026 midterms. As I said, there are already some very ominous signs about what the DOJ is planning to do. And remember, I predicted this as well. I said Matt Gaetz, the original, high-profile very controversial nominee, was a foil, that Trump, in fact, would appoint someone just as bad or worse, but with better credentials like Pam Bondi, and that's exactly what he's done. And the Department of Justice is not the president's lawyers. They are the lawyers of the American people and the Constitution, but this administration doesn't believe that.
Wow, we just got a $50 donation from Anna Livy. Thank you so much, Anna. We appreciate that tremendously. Some other donations that didn't make it on the air: Char Thomas, Adam Evans, Gurin, Sarah. I also want to say, if you buy our merch, make sure that you post it on social media, because we will repost it, and we want to see what it looks like on you guys, right?
That'd
you had
be
nothing
awesome
to do with any of that. Yeah.
All right. So thanks for tuning in.
Wait, I got to do my send-off.
Oh, send off.
Okay. First off, the Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this, so stay tuned for that. Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight?
This is our 150th show. We have 171,000 subscribers. We started with nothing. If you continue to support us, we're going to go at least for another 150 or even more.
Wow.
And we'll continue to tell you the truth to the best of our ability, to go beyond the usual blather of conventional wisdom commentators, and go deeply into the real implications for every American of what's going on in our politics and our society.
Thank you, Sharon Novak, for the last second donation. All right, folks. Lichtman Live post show coming up. Stick around for that. Dad, say goodnight to the people.
Good night. We will see you on Tuesday.
Happy 4th of July to everybody.
Right. Have a great 4th.
Read some history to...
Yeah, read some history and understand, what's going on in the present moment.
Absolutely.